The first time, Eliza Harrow stole water in broad daylight. She did it with 3 rifles on her back and her dead husband's shovel under Abram Cutter's headgate. "Touch that lever, and he'll own your bones," Walt Bender warned. Eliza leaned harder. The rusted bar screamed. Then the gate jumped, and water burst through the cut like something angry to be free. It ran hard down the east ditch, toward Tomas Ortega's peach trees, whose leaves had curled so tight they looked like clenched hands. Tomas took off his hat. His little granddaughter began to cry from relief before the first trickle even reached the orchard. Walt stepped off his horse with his rifle low. He was a thick man with a damp upper lip and the habit of smiling only when someone weaker was cornered. "That water was bought and paid for. Cutter owns every share on this branch but yours." Eliza kept both hands on the shovel. The iron was so hot it stung through her calluses. "My deed says dawn to dusk, every 7th day, from Harrow Spring to the lower east ditch. Owen taught me to read it. Owen's dead." That struck where he meant it to, but she did not move. She watched the muddy rush fill Tomas's ditch, listened for the pull in its voice, then nudged a rock into place with her boot until the flow spread cleaner. "Then it's fortunate his widow still has a memory," she said. Mercy's Crossing had drifted to the road to watch. Drought made people curious, cruel, or quiet. Most days the valley could not decide which. Mrs. Bell stood near the mercantile wagon with one flowery hand over her mouth. Deputy Lyle Henson sat a little apart on his bay horse, pinching his wedding ring with his thumb, the way he always did when honor and comfort pulled in different directions. Before we go any farther, settle in wherever you're listening from tonight, and, if you've a mind to, tell us in the comments where you're hearing this story from. Hard country feels less lonely when folks know who sat down together to hear it. Walt spat into the dust. "You'll regret this by sundown, probably," Eliza said. "But regret doesn't kill peach trees." He mounted again and rode off with his men. The deputy lingered. "You should have let it be, Mrs. Harrow," he said. "Lean years make men do hard things." Eliza looked at the water racing toward the orchard. Funny how hard things always seem to land on the hungry. He had no answer for that. Few people in Mercy's Crossing did. Her place sat 2 miles east of town, a weathered house under cottonwoods Owen had planted with a coffee can and a mule that hated him. In better summers the yard smelled of cut alfalfa and damp earth. Now it smelled of hot boards, dust, and a spring giving up its secrets one drop at a time. Eliza crossed the yard with the shovel over her shoulder and stopped. The barn door stood open. She slipped the butcher knife from beneath the porch rail and went in sideways. A man was slumped against her feed chest, one hand pressed to a blood-soaked shirt, a leather survey tube clutched under his arm. He had the lean look of a person who had lost weight he could not spare. His jaw carried an old scar. Her mare, Juniper, watched him from the stall with mild disgust. If he had meant her harm, the horse would have kicked him through the wall. "You picked a poor place to die," Eliza said. His eyes opened, gray, steady even through pain. "I was aiming for shade. Who sent you?" "Nobody. That's why I'm still breathing." She glanced at the survey tube. "Men measuring land don't miss my road by accident." "You're Eliza Harrow," he said. "If the stories are true, you'll want to see what I took out of Box Elder Canyon before Cutter's men shot me for it." Everything in her went still. Owen had ridden to Box Elder Canyon the week before he died. He had come back on a wagon board, skull split. 3 men swearing a shelf of rock had gone under him. She had never fully believed them. Hoofbeats struck the lane outside. The stranger heard them too. "They tracked me," he said. Eliza moved before he finished the sentence. She got him behind a haystack, threw a horse blanket over the survey tube, and kicked loose straw across the blood, just as the knock came at the door. A taking knock, not a neighbor's. Abram Cutter waited at the gate with Deputy Henson, Walt Bender, and 2 ranch hands. Cutter was one of those men who looked cleaner the meaner a season got. His black vest lay neat across his chest. Silver touched his temples. His eyes were pale, patient, and altogether without mercy. "Mrs. Harrow," he said, "I hear my water visited your neighbors this morning. It arrived under my name," she said. The deputy shifted in his saddle. "We're looking for a wounded man. Came through town an hour ago. Then I hope you catch him." Cutter's smile did not move. "He stole documents from my works in Box Elder Canyon." "Your works?" "Reservoir improvements. Drought requires adaptation." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This does as well. 3 missed payments. Back taxes. Sign your water rights to the bank, and I forgive the debt. Refuse, and your property is auctioned Saturday morning." Eliza did not take the paper. Wind turned the cottonwood leaves, showing their pale undersides like nervous hands. Owen paid half that note in calves. The ledger does not show it. Then, the ledger lies. The patience in his face thinned. You are one widow on dry land, Mrs. Harrow. Don't mistake stubbornness for leverage. Don't mistake ownership for God. Walt looked down to hide a grin. Even men who served cruelty enjoyed seeing it answered, provided the answer did not cost them anything. Cutter tucked the notice away. Saturday, then. Dignity does not irrigate a field. No, Eliza said. But theft shouldn't either. He rode off without another word. Back in the barn, she cut open the stranger's shirt and found a grazing bullet wound high along the ribs. He hissed when the whiskey touched it, but never asked her to stop. Name, she said. Gideon Vale. The name landed from somewhere old. Owen at the supper table 1 month before he died, cursing a new engineer Cutter had hired to survey the canyon. Smart hands, sad face, Eastern schooling, no business working for Abram Cutter. Eliza tied off the bandage. You were there when my husband died. He shut his eyes for one beat. Yes, did you watch him fall? I watched him refuse to sign false flow records. Cutter decided a rockslide would explain more cleanly than a witness. I watched that too. For a second she nearly struck him with the whiskey bottle. Instead she said very quietly, keep talking. Gideon slid the survey tube toward her. Maps spilled out across the barn floor, cross-sections, flow calculations, a sketched gate where no gate had ever been filed with the county. Figures showing Harrow Spring diverted west through a hidden wall and into holding ponds beyond the ridge. Eliza stared until the line steadied. The drought had not broken the valley by itself. It had been built. Cutter's plan was simple in the way monstrous things often are. Starve the valley. Buy the notes cheap through the bank. Acquire every water right. Then sell the stored flow to a copper syndicate pushing south. Farms gone, water monetized, conscience buried under paperwork. Why come here? Eliza asked. Because Owen was the only decent man I met in that canyon, and I let him die alone. Because I found the rest of Cutter's ledgers yesterday, and understood what silence was buying. And because your water right is the last one he needs to make the theft look legal. Gideon swallowed. If you turn me over, I won't blame you. She looked toward the door, where the late sun made a bright blade across the dirt. Turning him over might buy her a day, a week, maybe enough money to leave with what little dignity Cutter had mocked. Instead, she rolled the maps tight and shoved them beneath the grain bin. You don't get to die yet, she said. Saturday's too close, and I need you alive enough to show me where my water went. That night, Tomas Ortega came by with his eldest son Mateo and a crate of peaches no bigger than apricots. They stood in Eliza's kitchen with a single lamp between them, while Gideon, pale as old paper, explained the diversion wall in pieces. Tomas had farmed below Harrow Spring for 30 years. He listened without interrupting, but his hands shook around his hat. If this is true, he said at last, then every dead row in this valley wears Cutter's name. It is true, Gideon answered. I measured it myself, Mateo, young enough to think courage should always be fast, said. Then we ride tonight. Eliza shook her head. No, tonight Cutter expects panic. Tomorrow he sends the auction notice, tightens every road, and watches my gate. So tomorrow night we go where he doesn't think dry farmers know how to look. She tapped the map. Under the ditch, under the stone. Water leaves a trail even when men lie about it. At dawn, Deputy Henson nailed the auction notice to her gate post with a spike from her own barn. Saturday, 10 o'clock. Property, stock, structures, attached rights. Mercy's Crossing reacted the way frightened towns always do. Mrs. Bell brought coffee and old sheets for bandages. 2 ranch wives sent flour in unmarked sacks. The barber said Eliza was prideful. The pastor spoke on endurance and never named the thief in the room. Men who once borrowed Owen's plow suddenly found urgent reasons to cross the street when she passed. By afternoon she had become easier for them to discuss than to help. Eliza spent the heat of the day walking her ditches with Gideon's maps under her arm. The dirt broke like stale bread beneath her boots. At the lower seep, where Harrow Spring should still have been cool even in August, she knelt and put her ear to the ground. There, faint but certain, a buried rush under pressure. Gideon watched her from the bank, one hand pressed to his ribs. What do you hear? A spring being told to lie. He almost smiled. Owen said you listen to water the way other people listen to scripture. She stood too quickly, annoyed by the ache that line left in her chest. Don't borrow a dead man's tenderness to win me over. I wasn't trying to. That evening Cutter came himself. He found Eliza lowering the last bucket from her cistern into a washtub, while Tomas's granddaughter sat inside it, skinny knees drawn to her chest, eyes closed in the first full bath she had had in over a week. 2 other children waited with towels. The sight made Cutter pause, and Eliza was glad for that. Let him look at what greed actually cost. "You are pouring away your own survival," he said. "No," Eliza answered. "I'm washing a child. I know the difference." He glanced at the nearly empty cistern. "Sign tonight. Go east. Leave with enough money to start again. A widow alone has no sensible use for this much land." Eliza wrung out a cloth over the little girl's shoulders. "Owen planted every tree on this place with his own hands. You think I'd trade them for rail fare because a bully learned bookkeeping?" Cutter finally looked at Gideon, who had come onto the porch with Eliza's revolver tucked under his coat. "Mr. Vale," Cutter said, "I had hoped the canyon finished what conscience could not." Gideon answered without heat. "You should have built a better wall." Cutter smiled, but something mean moved behind it. "Water goes where power sends it. So does the law." Eliza met his gaze. "Maybe, but men like you forget one thing. A person can live a long time on pride, but not near so long on regret. One day this valley will be the only thing left to remember you by." "I'd think hard on what you wanted to say." That line stayed with Gideon. She could see it in the way he looked at her after Cutter rode away, as if he had spent a long time among men who bent and had forgotten what an unbent person looked like. After dark, Eliza, Gideon, and Mateo rode for Box Elder Canyon. Mrs. Bell kept lamps lit in Eliza's house to make it seem occupied. Tomas watched the lower road. Fear had not left the valley, but it had started to lose its appetite. The trail north smelled of crushed sage and warm stone. Moonlight laid silver on the ridge. Gideon rode stiffly, breath shallow from pain. Halfway up he said, "Owen talked about you when we surveyed." "Did he?" "Said marrying you was the first useful thing he'd ever done with his luck." The sentence hit her harder than Walt Bender's cruelty had. She kept her eyes on the trail. "Don't make me sorry I bandaged you." Fair enough. They reached the lip of the gorge near midnight. Below them, Cutter's diversion works glimmered in lamplight. A fresh breastwall of stone and timber wedged across the narrowest part of the canyon, sluice gates turning west into holding ponds that should never have existed. Even from above, Eliza could hear trapped water hammering behind it. 2 guards sat by the lower capstan, another walked the wall. Gideon leaned close. "The field ledger should be in the tool shed. If he hasn't moved it, and if he has, then the wall itself is our witness." The easy path still existed. Turn around, save what little she could. Let the valley decide whether it wanted truth badly enough to pay for it. Instead, Eliza tied Juniper in the shadows and said, "Then we make the wall speak." And right here, where the hard choice finally costs something real, ask yourself what you would have done in her place. Would you trust the man who helped destroy your life because he might be your only road to justice? Or would you keep your hands clean and let the powerful write the story? Folks answer differently once grief has sat at their table. They climbed down in silence. Mateo stayed above to watch the trail. Gideon slipped toward the shed. Eliza moved for the release pins at the wall, fingers learning them by touch. The whole structure throbbed under pressure. Cutter had built it fast. Greedy men usually do. Gideon came back with a ledger book and a tin cylinder. "Found them," he whispered. "Hands where I can see them," a voice called. Abram Cutter stood on the upper platform with a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. Walt Bender flanked him. So did Deputy Henson, looking as if shame had at last become heavier than his badge. Cutter's eyes moved from Gideon to Eliza to the papers. "I was beginning to think stubbornness had finally made you cautious." "No," Eliza said. "Just busy." "Throw down the ledger." Nobody moved. The spring battered the wall behind them. Eliza could feel it in her boots. Too much pressure. Bad bracing. Cutter had built theft the way he built everything else. Quick, certain someone poorer would pay if it failed. "Deputy," she said, not taking her eyes off Cutter, "you know what this is." Henson swallowed. "I know what I've been told." "Then maybe it's time you listened to something else." Cutter shifted the shotgun toward Gideon. Eliza saw the intention arrive before the trigger did. She slammed the release bar with both hands. The pin shrieked free. The first blast shattered the shed instead of Gideon's chest, because the wall lurched at that exact instant. Then the canyon gave way. Water hit the braces like a train. One beam snapped, another twisted loose. Walt fired blind. Henson went to one knee. Gideon shoved the ledger toward Eliza. She caught it, grabbed the tin cylinder, and ran for the side ladder as black water exploded through the breach. "Shoot her!" Cutter roared. A bullet tore her sleeve. Another struck stone by her head. Then Gideon lost his footing on the slick boards and went down hard into the rushing spillway. The ledger spun from his hand and vanished. Eliza could have kept climbing. She could have saved the proof and let the man who had failed Owen at last pay in full. Instead, she shoved the tin cylinder into her shirt, turned, and leaped after him. The water hit like iron, cold, violent, strong enough to empty thought. She caught Gideon's coat once and lost it, caught his wrist the second time, and locked both hands around it. He slammed against a brace. She wedged a boot between two timbers and hauled until her shoulders felt ready to tear loose. The brace broke first. The released spring threw them both onto a gravel shelf below the wall. Mateo reached them by the horses. Above, Cutter's careful theft came apart in a roar that sounded almost like judgment. They made it to an abandoned sheep camp in the cedar break east of town just before dawn. Gideon bled through the bandage. Eliza's left arm went numb where a beam had clipped it. Far below them, the valley began to hear something it had nearly forgotten: water returning to ditches that had run dry for weeks. Eliza cleaned her arm with whiskey and then knelt beside Gideon while fever worked at him. The little shack smelled of cedar smoke, blood, and wet wool left from some herder's vanished season. She laid a rag across his throat. He opened his eyes at first light. "You should have kept the proof," he whispered. "I did," she said. He stared at her, not understanding. She touched the tin cylinder hidden inside her shirt. Gideon's face slackened with relief, and something more painful than relief. "Owen copied the original register into that case," he said. "The syndicate contract, too. He handed it to me the day he rode up there and told me if anything happened, I was to carry it to Pueblo. I carried fear instead." Eliza opened the cylinder with stiff fingers. Inside were folded copies of the territorial register for Harrow Spring, Gideon's field notes, and a contract stamped with the seal of the Arkansas Western Copper Company. Purchase of water delivery contingent on full acquisition of valley properties. Fraud written in careful ink. She sat back against the wall, exhaustion suddenly heavy as stone. Gideon watched her face. "Why come back for me?" he asked. Because no one had come back for Owen. Because she was tired of leaving decent things to die in places bullies chose. Because loneliness had become too practiced inside her house. She could not say all of that, so she told him the truest piece. "You don't have to be innocent to be worth saving." His mouth trembled into the ghost of a laugh. "That's more mercy than I deserve." "Deserve is a dry word," she said. "Doesn't grow much." He looked at her for a long time. Then, in a voice stripped clean of pretense, he said, "If I live through today, I don't want to spend the rest of my life being the man who looked away." She believed him. If this story is moving you, you're exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe. Tell us to keep bringing you these hard-won endings. The auction began at 10 in front of the bank. Cutter stood on the mercantile steps in a clean coat, his patience stitched back into place for public use. Farmers gathered in a half-circle, hats in hand. Women shaded their eyes. Children clung to skirts. The main ditch behind the buildings still looked empty, though Eliza knew that would not last. On her way into town, she had opened the last check gate upstream, timing the returned flow the way Owen had once taught her to time spring runoff through cottonwood roots. She walked straight through the crowd with the tin cylinder in one hand and Gideon Vale at her side, pale but upright. Tomas Ortega stepped forward first and removed his hat. Mrs. Bell left her market basket right where it fell and came to stand beside Eliza where all could see. Cutter's smile thinned. "You look tired, Mrs. Harrow. You look finished." The banker began to read the notice, but Eliza spoke over him. "Tell them where the water went, Abram." Silence rolled across the square. Cutter spread his hands. "The valley suffers drought. We all know that." Eliza lifted the contract so the front row could see the seal. "Then why did you sell water you claimed God had taken? Why build a diversion in Box Elder Canyon? Why kill Owen Harrow when he found it?" The last sentence struck the crowd like a shot. Henson looked up sharply. Walt Bender cursed under his breath. Cutter's voice turned smooth and cruel. "Careful. Grief makes women theatrical, and guilt makes men sloppy." She faced the crowd. "He thought if he starved us slow enough we'd call it weather. He thought a widow would sell quiet, and the rest of you would sell frightened." Gideon took the papers from her and read 3 lines from the contract. Thomas said he had watched Harrow Spring run in worse summers than this one. Mrs. Bell said Cutter's clerk had been burning extra ledgers behind the bank at night. Then Deputy Henson took off his hat, looked at the ground once, and said he had seen Owen Harrow ride into Box Elder Canyon and Abram Cutter ride out alone. That might still have dissolved into argument if the sound had not risen from behind the mercantile just then. Water, real water, rushing through the town ditch where nothing had moved at sunrise. The returned current came hard around the bend, filled the dry channel, and flashed brown gold in the sun. People turned as one. A child laughed. Someone began to weep openly. Cutter spun toward the sound, and something feral finally tore through his composure. He reached for the pistol inside his coat. Eliza was already moving. She stepped into the draw, slammed the tin cylinder against his wrist, and drove her shoulder into his chest. The gun fired wild through the bank sign. Cutter staggered backward off the step into the mud gathering beside the now running ditch. Years of being underestimated had taught Eliza exactly how close a cruel man preferred to stand before he believed he had already won. She used all of it. One shove, one hooked boot, he went down hard. Deputy Henson kicked the pistol away. "Don't," Cutter snapped, looking up at him. "You work for me." Henson's hand shook as he drew the cuffs. "Not anymore." Cutter lost the bank before sundown, lost the valley by week's end, lost the trial by winter. Fraud, unlawful diversion, conspiracy, and Owen Harrow's murder once Walt Bender decided loyalty looked different inside a cell. The copper contract was voided. Farms sold under false drought claims were restored where the law could restore them, and compensated where it could not. Cutter's holdings paid for repairs to the ditches he had nearly killed. When the first full irrigation turn came in September, half the valley gathered at the east headgate. Eliza handed one pretended not to see. Gideon stayed through harvest because his ribs were still healing, through winter because the tack room roof needed rebuilding, and through spring because leaving had started to feel too much like another name for cowardice. He worked quietly, listened better, laughed rarely, but when he did, sounded surprised to find itself in the world. One evening in April, he set Owen's old coffee cup beside Eliza on the porch and said, almost to the boards between them, "Strange thing about broken ground. Give it one honest season and it'll shame the fields that had it easy." She looked at him then, at the scar along his jaw, at the hands that had once measured theft and now repaired what they could reach, at the patience he offered without trying to own the answer. "Stay," she said. He did. By the second summer, the Ortega orchard was heavy again. Children ran the ditch banks barefoot. Mrs. Bell smiled easier. The old bank became a schoolhouse on weekdays and a meeting hall on Sundays. People who had once dropped their eyes when Eliza passed now tipped their hats with the kind of respect that cannot be borrowed or bought. There were still hard days. Pumps failed, calves were lost. Grief did not leave just because justice arrived, but changed its seat at the table. Years later, when strangers asked how the valley survived the drought that nearly finished it, people gave different answers. Some said it was the day the water came back. Some said it was the day Abram Cutter went to trial in chains. But the truest answer was smaller and steadier. Peace, Eliza learned, was not the absence of sorrow. It was work done beside the right person, with enough light left to see their hands. At dusk, with the cottonwoods silver in the wind and the east ditch full from bank to bank, Eliza and Gideon stood shoulder to shoulder on the porch, while the last sun turned the running water below them into a ribbon of fire. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf seamstress sent west because her brothers were ashamed of her silence, and the half-blind rancher who recognized her courage before he ever learned the sound of her name.